Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Princeton University and the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs, I would like to welcome our distinguished speaker, Ehud Olmert, and his wife, Eliza, to campus and to thank you all for joining us tonight. I am also grateful to Dan Kurtzer, the S. Daniel Abraham Visiting Professor in Middle East Policy Studies and a former U.S. ambassador to both Israel and Egypt, and his colleagues in the Wilson School for hosting this event. We are privileged to have with us the 12th Prime Minister of Israel, who held office between 2006 and 2009 after a long and multifaceted career in public life. Born in what was then the British Mandate of Palestine, he was raised by politically active parents in the revisionist Zionist tradition, attended the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and established a legal practice in the city. In 1973, at the age of 28, he was elected to the Knesset, winning repeated re-election until in 1988, he joined the government of Yitzhak Shamir, first as minister without portfolio, and then as Minister of Health. Following the government's defeat in the election of 1992, Mr. Olmert entered municipal politics, making 2 successful bids for mayor of Jerusalem, the first member of his party to fill that post. A decade later, he returned to the Knesset, where he served as designated acting prime minister in the government of Ariel Sharon, a role that propelled him to the forefront of Israeli politics following Sharon's debilitating stroke in 2006. Mr. Olmert led his party to victory that year, a year in which he also spoke to a joint session of Congress. In his address, he acknowledged that there has not been 1 year, 1 week, even 1 day of peace in our tortured land, underscoring both the difficulty and the importance of changing this dynamic. Mr. Olmert's efforts to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict were enshrined in the Annapolis Conference of November 2007, when the government of Israel and the Palestinian National Authority met under American auspices in what he hoped would be a transformative moment in their relations, leading to a 2-state solution with a shared capital. Notwithstanding a legacy of mutual distrust, vocal opposition, and his own former hostility to territorial concessions, Mr. Olmert embraced the thorny plant of compromise. As he told the conference, "We no longer, and you no longer, have the privilege of clinging to dreams which are disconnected from the suffering of our peoples. I believe that there is no path which does not involve painful compromise for you, Palestinians, and for us, Israelis." Although the conference and subsequent discussions failed to forge a consensus, Mr. Olmert believes that the parties were closer to reaching an agreement than at any time in the past. He relinquished the reins of office to Israel's current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, in 2009, but remains a close observer of Israeli-Palestinian relations and a strong proponent of a comprehensive settlement. Writing in the New York Times in September, he noted, "Leadership is tested not by one's capacity to survive politically, but by the ability to make tough decisions in trying times. Now is the time. There will be no better one." I am grateful to Mr. Olmert for sharing this rich perspective on the Middle East with us tonight, and I invite you to join me in giving him a tiger welcome.
Thank you very much, President Tillman, for your kind words. I must say that I'm very excited to be here. It's not one more of the lectures that you make in a series of visits in America or in other places. Princeton is not every place. And it's really, you mentioned that I spoke at the joint session of Congress, which is naturally a great honor for anyone to be here, to be there. But it's quite an honor to be able to be on the stage of Woodrow Wilson in Princeton University, which is one of the most distinguished academic institutions in the world, and to be welcomed by the president of the university and by my friend, the former ambassador, Dan Kurtzer, the husband of Sheila, who is a good friend of mine, is wonderful. So I thank you very much. And I'm very, very happy to be here with my wife. It's always amazing to see how sexy is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in almost every corner of the world. People are always curious to know what's going on, how it can develop, where it will go, what will be the ramifications of this event or the other event, and so on and so forth. I think has been hinted at by the President, in the past I had different opinions. And it has been said about people in a similar position to the one I had. When you are Prime Minister or you are President or you are in a position where you are the last stop. There is now no one behind you, and you have to take the decisions, and you have to make up your mind and to decide where to go and how to go and how to move all the forces under you into one direction. You may sometimes look at things in somewhat different way than what you thought you know before that. When the ultimate responsibility lies on your shoulders, you think twice. My suggestion, by the way, based on my personal experience over many years, in positions where I was the last stop, when you are mayor, and particularly when you are mayor of Jerusalem, believe me, you are in a very hot place. It's not so simple. It's no less difficult to be mayor of Jerusalem than to be prime minister of Israel, although sometimes I read or hear, or when people introduce me, they say, he was in one of the most difficult jobs in the world. So I say, you're talking about Jerusalem. They say, no, we thought about being prime minister. I said, hang on, maybe it's not. The one thing which must be remembered is that at the end of the day, you have to take a decision. You are not allowed in these positions to think forever. The privilege that you have in the academia, in the universities, to postpone it for tomorrow or for next week or for next month and to think again and to read another book, you don't have this privilege when you are in that position where you have to take decisions. Because sometimes if you take your decisions in the wrong time, it's worse and it's irreparable and irreversible. I say this because sometimes people are somewhat upset with the fact that when I was mayor in older days or when I was a minister before, I thought that somehow Israel can remain in all the territories that we control and still maintain its nature as a Jewish and democratic state. And over the years, particularly when I was mayor of Jerusalem, I found out that maybe this is a great dream. But if we want to be a democratic Jewish state, as was the dream of the generation that fought for the establishment of the State of Israel and created the State of Israel, the generation of my parents, who most of them immigrated to Israel from every corner of the world. My parents immigrated to Israel, you'd be surprised, from a small city in the northeast of China, Harbin. Still a small city in Harbin, although it has more than 12 million residents today. But then it was much smaller. When they immigrated to Israel in 1933, their dream was that they will be amongst those that will create a Jewish state and democratic state. And the more I had to deal with the issues that were on the agenda of the State of Israel, I came to the inevitable conclusion that we really have only two ways. There are not more. We may decide, which can be understood, I have to be honest with you, that Israel should maintain and keep all the territories from the Jordan to the sea. Historically, I personally believe that all these territories are so intimately linked to the history of the people of Israel, that in all our history, in all our lives, in all the various experiences that we went through as a people, we always dreamt of returning back to Zion, to these places. The whole history of the Jewish people is buried underneath this land. We never dreamt of Haifa, or even of Ashdod, a great city, by the way. Never dreamt of it. We dreamt about precisely those places that are in the midst of this political controversy which tears apart the people and the country. We dreamt about Shiloh. We dreamt about Beit El. We dreamt about all these places that when you open the Bible and you read the Bible and then you walk through these places, you can see the Bible alive. But so one can say, if he is minded and if he is sensitive enough to this part in Jewish history, that this is the most important thing and we want to keep these territories and we have to stay there. Fine, legitimate. But then one must understand that if we keep these territories, then in a matter of time, the State of Israel will cease to be what it was destined to be. It will be a different country. Because there are already now, in those territories, doesn't matter, sometimes people argue with me, not 4 million, there are only 3.5 million. Okay, so in about 10 years, 15 years, 20 years' time, they will become a majority. And when they will become a majority, the nature of the State of Israel will not be anymore what it was. Because one thing is impossible for the State of Israel, for much longer. To keep all these territories and not to give the residents of these territories full rights and equal rights to the rights of the Jewish people that are citizens of the State of Israel. This is a contradiction to the basic fundamental values of equality and democracy that we all believe in. So we may say, okay, we prefer territories, but then we must understand that in those territories there are enough people that will become a majority one day that may have entirely different ideas about the destiny, about the nature of this country. This is one way. The other way, if we want to maintain the state of Israel, a Jewish state and a democratic state, we have to separate from the Palestinians and to allow the Palestinians to establish their own independent state in territories which we were absolutely certain for generations that they belong to us, that we're tied up to them with memories that go back thousands of years. By the way, if we don't believe that these are our territories, there is no significance to any concession that we make. If it's not ours, then it's not ours in the first place. If it's ours, and in spite of this, we reach the inevitable conclusion that for the sake of living alongside a Palestinian state in peace and security and friendship and mutual respect, we need to pull out from those territories, it gives the concession a certain dimension of significance that makes a big difference to all sides. These are the two ways, there are not others. Either the land at the expense of changing the basic nature of the state of Israel, or a separation, which means that we have to go back to the boundaries that are based on the 67 lines. Now, I don't want to go into all these debates. It doesn't matter, you know, someone can ask me what exactly, where, here, there. I proposed it to the Palestinians. I'm ready to pull out back into the boundaries which are based on the 67 lines, including in Jerusalem. There are 250,000 Arabs living in Jerusalem. To this day, after 45 years, we haven't yet succeeded to create in Jerusalem, I'm not talking about all the territories, just Jerusalem, to create complete equality between the Arabs and the Jews. If we failed, because of whatever reasons, to make the Arabs living in Jerusalem completely equals to us, after 45 years, how can we expect to do it in the other territories? The failure in Jerusalem is perhaps the most powerful proof that rather than to try and create an artificial reality that will explode in our face, we have to make this very painful step which tears the hearts of every Jew and help create two capitals in two parts of Jerusalem. The Arab side will be the capital of the Palestinian state. The Jewish side will remain, of course, the capital of the Jewish state. I proposed it to the Palestinians. They never said no. That I have to say. I keep getting messages from Abu Mazen all the time that he says, don't forget, please, he says, don't forget to remind everyone that I never said no to you. So I keep this commitment. But when I send his message back, I tell him, yes, but I also remember that you never said yes. Now, you know, people can say, if they didn't respond to you, how can you expect that they will respond in the future? How can we trust them? And so on and so forth. Look, the world of politics and the world of decision-making amongst politicians and the world of decision-making in societies and countries and peoples that, for instance, Abu Mazen represents, is a very complex world. The easiest thing is to say, okay, he didn't say yes then, he can't be trusted. I'm an optimist. I think that had I stayed in government for another few months, we would have agreed and completed the agreement. I think that this agreement is inevitable. I think that one day when there will be peace, I urge you, I hope that there are enough first-year, second-year students here that will make their PhDs on the peace process between Israel and the Palestinians. So to those I give an advice, learn the specifics of my proposal to Abu Mazen, and you will find out that when peace will be signed, it will be identical to my proposal. For a simple reason. No, I'm not that presumptuous. For a simple reason. The Palestinians will not agree to anything less than what I proposed. And I don't see that there is a government in Israel at any time in the future that will be prepared to offer more. So, there is only one alternative. The issue is not the specifics of this proposal. It's the courage and the inner emotional strength of the leaderships to take a decision. In politics, at the end of the day, this is the issue. Are you prepared to take a decision? Are you prepared to face the possible political, personal ramifications of your decisions? Or are you looking for excuses? If you look for excuses, there are unlimited number of excuses. Why not? If you look for a solution, you try to look beyond the immediate difficulties into the brighter future. That's what I was trying to do. And one day, it will be done. I hope that neither us nor the Palestinians will not wait too much, because time is critical, and we need to be fully aware that if we will wait, sometimes missed opportunities do not return. Now let me jump for a second into a different part of the Middle East, because I know that you're going to ask me anyway, so before you ask me, I'll answer you. I read today in the New York Times first page a story about two Israelis that are preoccupied with Iran. The story is somewhat inaccurate in the sense that all of us are preoccupied with Iran for good reasons. There is something that must be understood. You know, people can see things in different ways. I know that there are quite a few people in the world that look at the possibility of Iran having a nuclear bomb and they say, I mean, what are they crying, these Israelis? Why do they raise hell so much? And I mean, what's the danger? The Iranians are not going to use it, and so on and so forth. We carry different memories and sensitivities, we Jews. For us, when we hear a threat that someone is really willing to destroy us, we have to take it seriously, because this is our lesson of history. Now, Iran is not just another country. Iran is 80 million people. Iran is not a backward country. This is a highly developed country with good education and highly developed academic institutions, with some of the best mathematicians in the world, with technological advancement which is very impressive, with natural resources that make Iran one of the richest countries in the world. And it has a non-democratic dictatorship, fundamentalist, extremist, and violent. And when the president of such country doesn't talk about a next-door neighbor that may threaten the foundations or the security or the day-to-day life of their country, he talks about one thing: the need to write off the map the state of Israel, and at the same time his country invests billions and billions of dollars in order to become capable of building nuclear weapons. No one can expect the state of Israel to remain indifferent. And I entirely support the attitude of the Prime Minister of Israel, who says precisely what I said, that Israel will not tolerate a nuclear Iran. We can't. From here on, we have to think, okay, what does it mean that you don't tolerate Iran, nuclear Iran? What do you do? What do you don't do? Who does? What can you do to stop it? How effective one thing can be and how effective the other thing can be? These are serious questions. They are not simple answers. My advice is always, when you are certain that you know the answer and you have analyzed all the different aspects of it and you reached an inevitable conclusion that leads you into one course of action, act. But if the answer is somewhat more complex, then think twice. And my understanding is that there are many different ways in which Iran can be stopped. I'm not certain, certainly not now, that the first option is necessarily, and the most effective option is the military option. Israel has to develop the military capacity, there is no question about it. If worse comes to worse, if all the different ways, if all the different attempts, if all the different actions will all fail, and there will be an imminent danger to the life of the state of Israel, and Iran will be close to possess nuclear weapons that can be used against the state of Israel, then it will reach that stage, then we can't rule out the military option. But we are still quite far from that. To try this option long before we have exhausted all the other options that we may possess, particularly when we cooperate with stronger and more influential nations that are as concerned as we are about this development. And therefore I welcome the decision of President Obama, together with other countries and with Israel, to implement what has been discussed primarily between President Bush and myself 4 years ago, to disengage Iran entirely from the banking system of the world. This is one step, but a very dramatic and important step, because this is an effective way of cutting off the ties of Iran to the rest of the world and influencing the quality of life of millions of people that may not remain passive in view of what extreme decisions of the government can cause to the well-being of the nation. There are many other actions that can be done by the governments that are concerned. And we have to take all these forces and act together carefully, focused on the targets, and with all the political power that we possess. Israel will definitely be part of it. Israel is not supposed and certainly doesn't need to even try to be the spearhead of this effort. It has to be America. Now, you know, when I hear some who try to argue and to say, but, you know, we can't afford to be dependent on others. We have to be in a position where when we decide we can do what we need to do in order to save ourselves, regardless of what others may or may not do. I suggest something that I know, certainly for Israel, is not easy, is a certain degree of modesty. Why? Because there is not a country in the world, certainly not Israel, but not only Israel, which is entirely independent of the entire world and can do whatever it finds fit to do at a certain time if it is important for its interests. Can America be totally independent? When America wanted to take over Iraq, right or wrong, it's a matter of an opinion. There are those who supported it, there were many who were against it. Did America do it by itself? No. There were Australian soldiers and Polish soldiers and British soldiers and German soldiers and Spanish soldiers and whatnot. Even the United States of America, the mightiest nation on earth, when it decided to act against an enemy, it didn't do it by itself. So when I hear some leaders that talk about the right to act independently, I ask, okay, what do you mean, the right to act independently? You will send your planes to Iran? Where were the planes made? In your country? Or you got it from someone? And you can go on and on and on and talk about it. So, you know, what is to free yourself of a larger sense of responsibility and cooperation with other countries? Empty words. We have to be careful not to resort to an area which will, I think, will isolate Israel unnecessarily from the civilized community that we want to belong to and that we believe is essential for the future and the safety of the State of Israel. Therefore, I think that the Iranian issue should be dealt with forcefully, powerfully, by the Western countries, by the democratic countries. I expect the United States of America to carry on this battle with all its power. I'm certain that Israel can be extremely helpful in making this effort successful. In fact, not only that I'm certain, I know what we can do, I know what we did, I know what we can do together. It's not always made in public. It's not always done with announcements prior or after the event, but it can be very useful. It was useful, it is useful, it can be very useful. It doesn't need statements on a daily basis. It's not always helpful. But the issue is serious, and the reason for Israel to worry is genuine, and the need to act against it is urgent, and I trust that whoever is president in America, I personally think that I know who the president will be in the future, but I don't want to go into this because, you know, enough for me Israeli politics. I don't have to go into American politics. I think that the American leadership will carry on this battle and Israel will be part of it until Iran is stopped for the well-being of the region, of the Iranian people, and of the entire world. And finally, I want to return back to what I started with. I talked about a peace. I'm not blind to the recent developments which took place in the Middle East. And not only in the Middle East, in North of Africa, in Arab countries, what is known as the Arab Spring. I'm not certain that the Arab Spring leads to an Arab summer. I'm somewhat afraid that the Arab Spring leads more into the Arab winter, which is not very pleasant. And I'm afraid. I'm afraid because we have built relations with Egypt, which were not the warmest relations in the world, but which were good enough to save Israel of any military confrontation in the south part of Israel for more than 30 years. This is not insignificant. We didn't have to mobilize one soldier to the south borders of Israel over a period of more than 30 years. And we had mutual respect and good relations with the Egyptian leadership. The Egyptian leader, I met with him and I was quite friendly with him. President Mubarak used to say to me, your friend, President Bush, he talks about democracy. He doesn't understand that our region is different. Maybe retroactively, Bush wasn't that dumb when he talked about democracy. Because even in countries such as the Arab countries, there is time that the people just can't tolerate it anymore. And due to circumstances, of course, they finally spell it out in a way that the governments can't resist. And it happened in Tunisia, it happened in Libya, it happened in Yemen, it happened in Egypt, it now happens in Syria. While I am concerned, while I am unhappy about the possible ramifications and the potential takeover in some countries of the leadership by radical forces, as it happened in Iran 30 odd years ago, at the same time, I suggest that no one will lose hope that these same expressions of protest that erupted not from organized bodies, political bodies, but from the hearts of people will be ultimately powerful enough to force the people, the governments, and the leaderships to move forward in the direction of reconciliation, of democracy, of peace with the enemies of those countries. The responsibility of Israel, again, under these circumstances, is not to look for excuses why not, but to help build the ways that will ultimately lead to the achievement of the dreams that will guarantee our future and our neighbors' future. This is, I think, our main challenge, and I hope that we will be worthy of it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm Dan Kurtzer, and I've been asked to moderate questions and answers, which former Prime Minister Olmert has been gracious enough to accept. As you formulate questions, not speeches, and I will give precedence to students who wish to ask them, I do want to add one word of introduction to the warm words of welcome that President Tillman spoke earlier. My experience as ambassador has provided years of anecdotes and stories, and I still have a truckload of them ready to publish at some point. When I do, a central character is going to be the former Prime Minister of the State of Israel, with whom I was fortunate enough to forge not only an excellent working relationship, but also a friendship. Even ambassadors need go-to guys, and at that time, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Trade was my go-to guy when I needed a question answered, when I needed advice, when I needed to understand what was happening in the complex politics of Israel. The former Prime Minister was most gracious with his time, and more than that, as you heard tonight, with the creative thinking that has made him one of Israel's greatest leaders over a period of several generations. So it's an honor to be up here with you tonight.
Thank you very much. But now that you took the liberty of talking about the relations between ambassadors and ministers and prime ministers, allow me to say something which does not relate to you, but it relates to an American ambassador in Israel, if you don't mind. Okay, for 1 second. Talking about friendship, talking about good relations. You know, one time an ambassador in America came to me, an American ambassador in Israel came to me, and he said, look, this is between you and me. I said, of course. He said, look, you know, we America are really best friends you have. We are supporting you. We give you foreign aid in billions. We provide you with all your, you know, the most sensitive needs that you have. You know, I look at the cabinet of Israel and the ministers of Israel, and you guys all drive European cars. I mean, how can you? I mean, we're talking about friends. Why don't you buy American cars? Why do you have to buy Volvos? Why do you have to buy Volkswagens? Why don't you buy American cars? I said, you know what? This guy's got a point. And then I escorted him out of my office to his car. And I saw that he drives a Mercedes-Benz made in Germany. Very comfortable, very good car. I looked at him and I say, hey, when you will drive American cars, we will change the regulations in Israel and we'll drive American cars. By the way, I think now the American ambassador drives an American car and some of the Israeli ministers also.
Okay.
But I insist, it didn't happen with him, it happened with his predecessor.
Whoever that ambassador was said, do as I say, not as I do. All right, questions, particularly students, right here. And hold on till the mic gets to you.
Thank you very much for your speech. I enjoyed it. And I had one question. You outlined several measures that could be taken prior to resorting to the military option. However, how can we gauge the efficacy of those measures, and how long should we wait in order to evaluate whether they worked or not?
We evaluate them every day.
Go there.
We evaluate them every day. Every day. Believe me, we know more than we want them to know that we know. Suffice it if I say this, right? We have established a certain capacity to be able to know, and we try to increase this capacity every day. And it is mostly, by the way, done, we talked about it earlier at dinner, by, which is amazing, by very young kids that serve in the Israeli army. You know, one of the things that are now well talked about is the cyber war. I don't want to go into the details, but what I'm always amazed at and proud of is when I was presented with a certain operation or a certain piece of enormously important information that was achieved through such operation. And the chief of the intelligence, top general, brought to me a young kid of 18 or 19, and he said to me, he found a way to do it. So number one, we know. We know. I don't say that we know everything. We know every vibration. We know enough. And we know how effective things are. And we have to be on the alert all the time. Now, I don't have an absolute answer to this. I don't know. I think that the combined forces of America, of Great Britain, of France, of Germany, of Israel, and other countries can stop the Iranians without a need for a direct military comprehensive confrontation that will trigger a regional war in the Middle East with very bad results to all parties involved. That we don't need. If we can do this in other ways, and I think we can. There is someone there.
In the back.
Thank you very much for your remarks. I just had a quick question about another regional actor that is also a democracy in your region, Turkey. I was wondering what your hopes and aspirations are for Israel's relationship with Turkey going forward into the next decade. Thank you.
This is a difficult question because it may force me to do what I don't want to do, which I promised the president not to do, which is to criticize my government. Not because I think that the Turks should be exempted from any criticism. The Prime Minister of Turkey is a leader of an Islamic party. And the government in Turkey is a government of Islamic party. And this is quite an extreme government. But I succeeded in keeping good personal relations with Prime Minister Erdogan. And I also, which I thought was a good idea, I commissioned him to be the go-between Israel and Syria in an attempt to make peace between Israel and Syria. Some of my colleagues in the really inner circle of my office were somewhat perplexed, and they say to me, why do you choose someone who is known to be so extreme and pro-Syrian to be the broker, to be the one that go between you and Bashar Assad? And I said, precisely because he is pro-Syrian. He is not going to decide for me. But if I want to convince the Syrians that I mean business, I'd rather have Erdogan talk to them than an American congressman or senator or a French minister. Because when the French minister or an American senator speaks to them, Bashar Assad, you have to understand where he comes from. Now, and I'm not talking now about the present situation, which is terrible anyway. But at that time, says to himself, this is this congressman. Okay, he's selling me this crap. Let's face it. He belongs to the Zionists. They control him. They control America. You know these rhetoric of Arab countries. But if Erdogan comes to him and he says to him, listen, the Prime Minister of Israel talked with me, and I'm convinced that he really means business, then the Syrian will listen to him in an entirely different manner. And by the way, he did a very good job, and we were quite close to breakthrough as a result of the Turks' efforts, which should be commended. Today, by the way, at lunch, I met with someone who was in Syria a year and a half ago. and he was a guest, American, was a guest of Bashar Assad. And Bashar Assad said to him, so he says, and I have no reason to doubt it, he said we were as close as ever to have peace with Olmert, and I really regret that I didn't complete it. By the way, in one of the times, in a different way though, someone that visited Syria talked to Bashar Assad a lot, told him, listen, you know, Olmert is really ready to make peace with you, why won't you do it? And okay, they had a pleasant talk. Before he left him, he said, tomorrow I'm leaving to Israel. Can I say something to Olmert on your behalf? He said, what does he like? So the guy said, he likes hummus. He likes hummus very much. The truth is that I'm not certain about it. But he said it. The next day he said, when do you leave? He said, at 9 o'clock. At 8:50, a special messenger came to the hotel where he stayed with a can of fresh hummus from the president to me. The guy drove from Syria through Jordan and arrived on the same day to Israel and rushed to my office and asked to see me, and he said, what is it? I mean, we knew who he was, so we took him rather seriously because we knew him. He said, I have something to the prime minister from the president of Syria. And he came with the hummus. So I sent one of my assistants, I said, go out and buy a pita, you know, so we can eat it. When the security forces, the Secret Service, found out that I ate hummus that was sent to me without them trying it first, they wanted to kill the guest that came because they said, you could have killed the prime minister. How do you know that there wasn't poison in it? Well, I'm still alive. Come back to Turkey. We were very close to concluding in December of 2008. And there were all kinds of conditions and understandings and so on, and I went to Turkey, and I had dinner with the prime minister and all his staff and my staff and so on, and then he suggested that I will... guys, these are secrets. You are not supposed to leak them, I hope. Okay? It remains here. Okay? Maximum to the New York Times, but no more. Anyway, I'm just joking. He asked me, you know, at the end of dinner, he said, okay, they all go out. Please, you stay in. I'll talk now to Bashar Assad on the phone, and we'll work out the finals, and then the foreign minister of Syria will come tomorrow or tonight to Turkey, and tomorrow morning we'll have press conference with him and you and me, and we will break the news, and then we will have to conclude, and we are on the way. I said to him, which language do you speak to the Syrian? He said, in Arabic. I said, I'd better stay out. Because I didn't want to be and not to understand what's going on. And then to have to face the possible consequences of some misunderstanding because I didn't understand the language. Anyway, it turned out that Assad was not ready yet in that night, and as a result, at 1:30 in the morning, I say to Erdogan, Prime Minister, thank you very much. I think he's not ready yet. I don't want to wait here until the morning without anything. You work on him tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, towards the weekend, and if you want me, I'll come any day that you want. Give me a notice of 3 hours, and I'll take a plane and fly over. Okay. What happens is that 2 days later, and I flew back, 2 days later, in the middle of a defense cabinet session, security cabinet session, notes come in that the Hamas are shooting rockets on the south part of Israel, and already in a matter of 2 or 3 hours, more than 60 rockets were landing in Ashkelon, in Ashdod, in Beersheba, and more than 1 million people were sitting in shelters. It continued through the day and overnight, and it left me with no option but to respond. And one must understand, you know, you want peace, you're ready to sacrifice for peace, you're ready to make every possible effort, but your primary responsibility as the head of state is to protect the lives of your people and your children. And when 1 million people in their homes, in territories which are not in any dispute, they are part of the state of Israel, recognized by the international community to be part of the state of Israel. They are attacked without any provocation with rockets. You can't sit idle and say, I may have talks with the Palestinians or with the Turks or with the Syrians, and therefore I will not respond because it can spoil it. I had to respond. Then Erdogan said that I misled him because when I visited him 3 days before, 4 days before, I failed to tell him that I'm going to attack the Palestinians, and now he is seen to be a collaborator. I said, and if I told you, could it be any better in this respect? Had you known in advance that I'm going to attack, could it be any better to you? It could be worse. And also, by the way, I said, I didn't tell President Bush that I'm going to attack. So what do you expect? That Bush will not know and you will know? Anyway, that has soured the relations somewhat. But then I have made exceptional efforts to improve it, and it improved. Then when the government took over for me, Netanyahu, the first question he was asked was, will you continue the negotiations with Syria through the Turks? And he said, the Turks? These liars that cheated us, that misled us? When Erdogan heard it, he was, of course, very flattered, as you can imagine. And the rest is history. I think that now Israel understands that, again, if you want to be right, it's easy. Erdogan gives you ample opportunities to be mad at him. But if you understand that this is a national interest to maintain friendly relations with the most powerful Muslim country and the most unified and the most developed economically, and a bridge to Europe and to the Arab countries, then you have to find a proper way to ignore sometimes unpleasant expressions and to try and build up the trust that once existed between the leadership of these two countries. I think it's possible. I hope that the leaders of Israel will understand it, and I hope that the leadership of Turkey will be smart enough to seize the opportunity that will be offered to them by the government of Israel.
Jesse, there was a question about 4 rows from the back. Yeah, right there.
Thank you. Hi, my question is not about the use of military force in response to the rockets. My question is about the disproportionate use of military force in Operation Cast Lead in Gaza.
The disproportion of?
The disproportionate use of military means.
You know, I apologize for any disproportion, if there was one. At the same time, I am sure that this will be, and I'm not cynical, I'm serious. It will be a very interesting subject for an academic study. What is proportion in the lives of people? When for 7 years, day in and day out, you are attacked with rockets without any provocation, in your country, in your own houses, in your own city, and you don't respond. You don't occupy an inch of land of the Palestinians in Gaza. And every day they shoot rockets. And children grow with fears. And they need such psychological therapies on a daily basis. for years. What is the disproportion when you try to stop it? I must tell you, in my mathematics, I'm not familiar with a formula that provides you with the specific number of bombs that you shoot to the other side in order to stop it. I don't know. Maybe, and I'm ready to accept it, maybe we have exaggerated every now and then. But I suggest that this will be put within the context of the entire event. And the entire event is that the Palestinians in Gaza are brutal. The Hamas is a terrorist organization. They killed Fatah people from the Palestinian community in a manner that is so much more brutal and cruel than anything that we ever did to the Palestinians. Now that I can tell you from the mouth of the president of the Palestinian Authority. He came to me and he said, these are animals, they are not human beings. Not what they do to you, what they did to their own brothers and sisters when they took over Gaza. When Hamas, Fatah people, that they are opposition to them. We are hiding in hospital on the 5th floor. They pulled them, pushed them, and threw them from across the terrace to the street from the height of the 5th floor and killed them, or they were shooting them in the knees. They were moving one after the other and shooting them on the knees to leave them crippled for the rest of their lives. This is what the Hamas people did. Now, what is the disproportion to stop it? I don't know. Maybe we were wrong, maybe we used a little bit more power. One thing I know, and I kept saying it all the time, I'm ready to make the most dramatic sacrifices for peace. I will fight with all the power that I possess to save the life of one child, Israeli child, that is threatened by a Palestinian terrorist. And by the way, the other guy who said it is President Barack Obama. When he visited Sderot, which was the target of so many of the attacks, in 2008, he said, if someone will shoot at my daughters, I will destroy him.
Let's do 2 more questions. Is that okay? 2 more?
Hi, thank you for your talk. So since the fact, it's come to light in 2003 that the Iranian administration approached the Bush administration with an offer to withdraw or to allow nuclear inspectors into Iran. In 2010, Brazil and Turkey brokered a potential agreement for a similar sort of agreement with President Obama. In retrospect, how do you view the American decision to ignore or not accept those agreements?
I wasn't sure.
In 2003, there was an Iranian initiative, diplomatic initiative. Bush administration ignored it. 2010. What do you think about U.S. diplomacy vis-a-vis Iran?
Look, the international community, including the IAEA, is united in its perception that all these attempts made by Iran were false, untrustworthy, and shouldn't be respected. Now, I'm not talking about us, okay? We are almost inevitably suspected that we are not objective. I'm talking about IAEA, the International Agency for Atomic Energy, right? Which sits in Vienna. And in their recent report, they say that the Iranians are misleading the international community consistently over a long period of time. And while they say that they don't develop the systems that will enable them to produce nuclear weapons, they are doing precisely this. Therefore, I think that the distrust of the American administrations, both in 2003 and in 2010, were based on the knowledge of what the Iranians are really doing. And I say, we know more than they believe that we know. And therefore, and what we know, the Americans know. Because we share with America all the intelligence that we have, and sometimes, not always, sometimes America has more and they share it with us. Sometimes we have more and we share it with America. So altogether, both of us know enough to be able to judge whether a certain initiative by Iran was meaningful and serious, or whether it was part of a strategy to mislead the international community.
Okay, last question right here in the middle.
Hi, good evening. I was wondering about your take about the sort of the local political arena in Israel. What do you think are sort of the leading candidates like Yair Lapid and Mofaz just won the elections? Do you think anyone is willing to do dramatic concessions like you just discussed?
I think that I have a certain influence in my party in Kadima, and that I made my position public and clear that could have affected the outcome long ago. I refrained from doing it, and I say to everyone that came to me, and all of them came to me, both competitors and others came to me, I apologize. Politicians have a big ego. They think that whenever they speak, no matter whether they have a microphone, they don't have a microphone, everyone listens to them and everyone hears them. I apologize. You're right. I refrained from doing it because I have enough tzuras, you know. I have. Why do I need this one? And yesterday there were these primary elections in the Likud, and Shaul Mofaz, former Minister of Defense and Minister of Transportation and Deputy Prime Minister in my cabinet, and former Chief of Staff of the Israeli Army, defeated Tzipi Livni, who was Foreign Minister and Vice Prime Minister in my cabinet. Quite frankly, I don't think that this is a spectacular, revolutionary development in the history of the State of Israel. But I suggest, and had I been an advisor of Bibi Netanyahu, I would have told him, don't be too happy and confident that you are going to be re-elected. Both things. Israeli politics is very volatile. And what appears to be certain and at one time can be entirely different over a short period of time. So I don't know to say right now, first, when the elections will take place, what will happen until the elections, and what will be the perception of the Israeli public few weeks after the primary in Kadima, and what the status of Shaul Mofaz will be. I think that there is a likelihood that there will be a parliamentary bloc in the next elections that will prevent Bibi from creating the same government that he has now. I'm not certain yet that there is a candidate that I am certain that can defeat Bibi, but I can see a political situation that will prevent him from making up the same cabinet. That is for sure. I could think of some circumstances in which someone will defeat him, but that I'll tell you when I next come to Princeton. And I hope it will be before the next elections. We still have time. Thank you very much.